Thanks for clicking on to the Taliesin Antiques YouTube channel. My name is Kieran and today we are talking Chinese and Japanese cloisonné. Okay then, so why am I making this video? Well, I'm an antiques dealer. I'm based in South Wales in the UK, and my job is to go out and find valuable items from across the world, different time periods, different cultures. So what I'm doing is sharing my tips based on my experiences and research, which will help you identify those items when you're out and about as well. So if you're interested in antiques, in reselling, anything like that, please support the channel by just clicking that subscribe button and the like button on the video. Okay then, so what is cloisonné? In its simplest form, it's the technique of applying coloured enamels to metal surfaces to create decorative objects. Now the name comes from the French word cloisons, and that refers to creating small compartments of metal by using thin strips of wire. The enamel is then pasted into these partitions and fired, and that creates the desired effect. Now this technique goes back to ancient times. It includes in places like Egypt, in Europe, and in the Middle East. But we're going to focus on the much later Chinese and Japanese adoption of the art form. And it's key to point out this video is aimed at beginners. It's to help you identify, age, and value your cloisonné piece. If you're looking for something more advanced, I would recommend going to the numerous academic books or lectures, or going to some of the communities of collectors who like to discuss these pieces. Okay then, so we're going to start by looking at how these styles and techniques have developed over the centuries. This will help us identify the age and the origin. So we're going to start by looking at China. So cloisonné objects likely reached China via the Silk Road trade route many years before, but it was during the Ming dynasty between 1368 to 1644 that the Chinese production would flourish. Now specific colours would become associated with Chinese cloisonné. Most notably would be the turquoise blue ground colour. The types of motifs and shapes would also develop over time. Now, for example, on earlier pieces you will see more floral motifs, and they would develop into animals, mythical creatures and figures as time went on. So let's take a look at some of the Ming pieces found in museums and sold at high-end auctions. Okay, so we're going to have a look at a few pieces from the Ming dynasty. We'll start with this amazing vase, one of the oldest known pieces of cloisonné works in the world, in the National Palace Museum in Taiwan. So said it's goose-shaped, as it's known as, which is the trumpet type shape. As you see here, it's just one of these early examples of that turquoise blue ground colour. Unfortunately, we can't zoom in on these pictures, but just some motifs that you're seeing here, heavily floral based. I think there might be some grapevines there. This one is actually marked by the Jingtai Emperor from the Ming Dynasty. I'm not going to talk too much about marks in this video, just because they can start to get a bit confusing, but there's an example of a very early one. And yeah, look, the bronze pieces have all been applied with glit. A great example from an early period. So we'll keep moving on. This example here is a scallop dish from the Ming Dynasty. This one is found in the Met Museum in New York, and we'll see a lot of images from the Met Museum because they've made their amazing collection very accessible. So again, scallop dish, glitter rims, turquoise blue ground, and then we see the extensive floral motifs, a lot of wavy type lines with the vines and stuff like that. So very interesting example. It's really showing that technique that you expect to see with Ming. Now, this is an interesting one. Again, mid 15th century, a covered box with hibiscus and grapevines, turquoise blue again, but we're starting to see some experimentation, deeper blue, ground colour, different types of flowers, and then in that spirit we go on to see another type of example here, which is this little dish, a great little piece from the late 15th to early 16th century, again in the Met Museum, and look at all sorts of different colours going on here. So we got the light blues grounds, the whites, the reds, and we're starting to see images of animals, in this case a pair of ducks. So there's a nice little selection for you. Okay then, so here I have a piece of Ming Dynasty Chinese cloisonné. No, I'm only joking. This is mid 20th century. I wish it was the real thing because if it were, it would be extremely rare and extremely valuable. These pieces were generally made for high end families or the imperial palace or for temples. So the chances of us finding any outside major museums and high end auctions are extremely slim. We'll move into the King dynasty and have a look at how those pieces developed into that time period.
Right then, so we're looking at the Qing dynasty, specifically the more early to mid period, up to about the year 1800. So we'll start off with this vase in the Met Museum again, goose shaped. This is dated to the 17th century, around the Kangxi period. Now, it's interesting actually to make a quick comparison between this one and the one we saw from the 14th century in the National Palace Museum in Taiwan. Um, yeah, if you look at these, I mean, it's amazing. These are 300 years apart, and what you start to see, I think it's fair to say, you start to see some different. It's still a turquoise ground color, but there's some shades changing there. The motifs, again, still floral, but there are some changes. All this scroll work is developing as well. So if you really wanted to deep dive into this and get a good idea of really being specific with your dating, these are the type of things you'd want to look at in closer detail. Um, yeah, incredible to see. And it's also worth pointing out that styles don't change overnight. You know, they bleed into one another. It's a development, so you're not going to see completely different by reign. There's going to be quite a bit of crossover. How elaborate the designs are becomes more and more developed as the Qing dynasty goes ahead. Here we have a very elaborate set, a garniture set. These were sold at Sotheby's. You got this incense burner, the candlesticks. You know, it's also the forms that they're being accompanied with are really elaborate. This is just an incredible set you would have here. Imagine owning these. How much does that go for? Well, the estimate was 120 to 180,000. So you can see how valuable items from this period can be. We're going to jump to the Qianlong period. Is a basin that was sold in Christie's, and we are starting to see sort of more mythical creatures, animals. This one features, this one features phoenixes. As you can see here, just the symbolism is always very prominent in Chinese art. So the phoenixes are representing rebirth and beauty, amongst other things. They also have a link to the Empress, a dragon, strength, power, and are also linked to the Empress. So we're starting to see that. And if you start looking at the scroll work starts to develop. So yeah, these sort of more straighter lines developed during the Qianlong period and become more prominent in the 19th century. So yeah, a stunning piece. We'll just move on to this. You know, they've correctly described it as a magnificent imperials linked to the palace. Cloisonné enamel double vase. Just look at that. Just an amazing piece of work. How big was that? 45 centimeters. And yeah, if we zoom in, you know, this going for several million. Yeah, you know, you've got the phoenixes again. Amazing floral motifs and patterns, scroll work. And this is why this type of piece is why the Qianlong period is considered the artistic height of Cloisonné, like it is with porcelain as well. This just sort of amazing, elaborate pieces. There's quite a lot of them, so there we go. That gives you a good idea.
Okay, so what we've looked at is just a snapshot of the cloisonné made during the Ming and early Qing dynasty. If you know, you could spend hours just looking at museum pieces, auction pieces, just to see the complexity, richness, and skill into the pieces being made in that period. Now, as I mentioned previously, they are rare and it's extremely unlikely that we will come across them, and they are very valuable if you do. I guess you never know, but it just seems unlikely. However, when we move into the 19th century, you start to see examples which are more common and available on the market. This is because of Western demand for these objects, and you start to see pieces which are made specifically for export. So we're going to have a look at those examples to get a good idea of what we're more likely to see.
Now we move into the 19th century, late Qing era, and we start to see pieces we're more likely to find today on the market because of that export market at the time. We start off with this lovely pair of vases which were sold at Christie's, and if you start having a look, you can, I'm sure you can make out yourself. So some developments, these borders, these straighter lines, as we've talked about, start to appear. Yeah, and if you really want to dig into detail, these are sort of things you'll be looking at. How much they go for? So they achieved $8,000. Another thing to point out is the development of more ground colours. This is a red pair. You see those patterns again. If you wanted to look at this, is what's known as the Greek key, or lei wen, I think is how it's pronounced. But please correct me if I got that wrong. But that's what that pattern is known as. These sort of scrolls as well do start to develop. So yeah, you do start to see changes like that as we move into the 19th century. I just wanted to show this vase. I don't want to point out it's not all typical in this century. There's still a lot of incredible, elaborate, complex designs. This is one at the Met Museum, which is dated to the 19th century. And look, what just an incredible piece. Again, imagine owning that. Just the amount of work and creativity that's gone into that. Dragon face, yeah, just you've got eyes there. It's just an amazing amount of work that's gone into such a incredible, elaborate thing. And I had to point this out as well at the Met Museum. Now, this is dated to the 19th century. I believe they had it donated to them in the late 19th century, so it's of the era. A simple, smaller vase, just showing the type of piece that was being made at the time. What's amazing about this one is it's actually a sample set. And what you're seeing here is the making process, and they're showing they've got in this box all the different enamel fragments. If you zoom in, you can actually see how the piece is made and the different stages. So you've got the initial base metal, the partitioning there, the applying of the enamel, and I believe there would have been one firing, and then another firing, and then it's been polished as well, and that's the final piece. So you can't ask for better than that. It's just an incredible thing to see, and that gives you a good idea of the making processes and some of the pieces from the 19th century.
Alright then, so on the whole, as we move into the 20th century, Cloisonné starts to become a lot more mass produced. What I'm showing you here is a clip of a documentary made by CNN, and it shows a modern day Chinese Cloisonné factory. It's showing how the machine techniques are used to achieve bolder colours, more precise symmetrical lines with thinner wires. They can still be very decorative, nice objects, however, they're not going to have the same pull as the older pieces. Here I have a couple that I picked up along the way. They're nice to buy if you can get them at a good price, but you just have to be realistic in determining the value of these. So that's it for now. We're going to now look into the Japanese history and their development of the technique. So as with China, Cloisonné objects are arriving in Japan for many years. It was in the mid 19th century that Japanese production starts to take off. This is a fascinating period for Japan as they're just opening the doors to trade to the West after 200 years of isolation. And during this time we see the emergence of incredible works of art on Cloisonné by great Japanese masters. They're using contemporary techniques to create a new distinctive style from the Chinese examples. This would go on to win acclaim internationally both at the time and later on. So let's take a look at some of those examples.
Right then, let's have a look at some Japanese examples from this Edo period to Meiji period, so late 19th century to the 20th century. As we're pointing out, Japanese cloisonné is so varied in styles and techniques. It would require a whole video to go through all of them. So we're going to get a very quick look, and we're going to start off with a couple of the early masters. So the first one we're going to look at here is, I'm going to try my best to get this correctly, but I believe it's Kawade Shibataro. Apologies if I got it wrong. This was a vase sold at Christie's, 2014, realising $12,500. Just a stunning work of art, if nothing else. as we move in closer, you can see that the wires used on this are actually silver rather than gold, as with around the rims. Lovely white ground. You've got the peacock feathers, really vibrant colours. And what you also see here is the early origins of the Art Nouveau style, which becomes popular in Europe in the early 20th century, and was famously influenced by Japanese art. And this is a great example of why. So just a stunning piece and very distinct to anything that we would have seen come out of China up until this point. Another early master, again, I'm going to try my best to get this correct. It's Namikawa Yasuyuki. This one is a stunning example as well. Has the silver rims. These are not, incidentally, not all Japanese pieces have these silver rims, but it's a distinct style in Japanese art. Beautiful, smooth cobalt blue ground, floral motifs, and it's a good time to point out that the lack of wires on this example might be noticeable, and that's because of advancements in enameling techniques around this period, which were taken up by Japanese artists, less so in China. So it's a good way to distinguish between the two styles. So what they were able to do, because of the advancements in technology, was have these larger areas of smooth, bold colours as a background colour. So you see a lot less wires in a lot of these Japanese pieces. Here's a good, and I should point out as well, that is a vase held at the Kyoto Museum in Japan. Here we have a couple of chargers sold at Sotheby's in, doesn't say the year, I don't think, but it says October 21st. Estimate $4,000 to $6,000. And as we zoom in, this is the most we can zoom in on these ones. Here's an example of this kind of very smooth background. What it allows to happen in the Japanese version is that the motifs will stand out and contrast even more so on these smoother backgrounds. So here you see the cranes and the floral decorations around the rims. You see dragons. That's a ho-ho bird, as is known in Japanese culture. And if you really wanted to dig into detail and really get a good idea of distinguishing between Chinese and Japanese art, these could be a good example if you were to study the dragons and the birds. They vary compared to the Japanese examples. I'm just going to look at a pair of pieces from the Victoria and Albert Museum. So these are... So what we see, I should point out, going into the early 20th century, is just a large demand from the West for this type of work from Japan, as you saw with China. So there are more pieces being made for specifically for export. And what I believe you find is more common in these pieces is this black ground, which you see here, and this is a miniature teapot. Just with this, all these different types of motifs, floral decorations, designs. We've got this pair of vases, which is also at the V&A. Black ground, birds, floral, different types of geometric shapes which were popular in the world around this period. Yeah, so these are more typical, and the Japanese Cloisonné is quite accessible in the West. If you go out there, it'll cost some money a lot of the time. Sometimes you might be lucky with a bargain, but this type of work is available out there on the market. So yeah, that's just a quick view of Japanese Cloisonné.
Alright then, so that gives an idea of the Japanese development throughout the mid to late 19th century into the early 20th century. It's worth highlighting that that is again a snapshot. The diversity in Japanese production is immense, so it's worth looking into as an individual subject. As we move into the mid to late 20th century, again, as in China, you're starting to see mass production, use of machines to create these objects. They start to become a bit more typical and common. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Again, they can be decorative and nice objects in their own right, but they do lose that distinct value of having the history and of being of their time. So there we are. That gives hopefully a good idea generally of Chinese and Japanese development. Now what we're going to look into is identifying age on a piece, potentially spotting fakes, and determining the value of an item. So we're going to take a look at a few examples here. When aging, I'm going to be focusing on things like patina, wear, colour fading, pitting and bubbling. Now we're going to start with this beautiful basin with Taoist immortals found at the Met Museum and dated to the 17th century. Now, as you can see from here, it's just a stunning example of early Cloisonné work. As we zoom in, you're going to see some signs of the aging process. Now we'll start with the exposed bronze rims. They're showing clear patina which runs across the majority of the area, although some parts are less affected. Now patina is caused by oxidization, and over the centuries this is going to affect areas at different rates, so it makes sense that it's not all completely uniform. Now as we zoom in further, you're going to start seeing examples of small holes or pitting. Now that will be evident on the other pieces we look at as well. Now my understanding is that this is caused by during the firing process when impurities in the copper pop up through the enamel. The technology of the kilns develops over the centuries. Now these are large ovens effectively, so what they're starting to develop is controlling the temperature. So on the older pieces you will see these holes, and they just vary from object to object. So next we have this incredible dish from the late 18th century, again found in the Met Museum. Now from a distance you can actually see the evidence of the colour fade, which would have been caused probably by exposure to sunlight. Over time that is going to dull the colours of the enamel. So looking up close you start to see these pitting holes again, and the patina on the exposed bronze. Now interestingly, when we look at the back, the colour fade is less evident, likely because this side was less exposed to sunlight. So now we'll take a look at some Japanese cloisonné. We got this Japanese bowl from the late 19th century found in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Really beautiful example with these two rabbits. Now from a distance you don't see any clear signs of aging, and to be honest not a great deal when you zoom in, apart from the odd pitting mark. I'm not 100% sure, but this is probably down to the advanced enameling techniques the Japanese were using at the time. However, when you look at the back, you can see some patina on that rim, and a slight crackle in the graze. Now this is probably caused by contraction of the metal over time, which then it goes on to affect the enamel on top there. Okay, I'm shamelessly going to have a look at my own website now, which is taliesinantiques.com, and I'm going to start with this amazing Japanese charger, which I believe dates the late Edo period. And in all honesty, I'm very happy to keep this for a while because I think it's just such an incredible example. Now from a distance you can see that colour fade across the piece, but then interestingly when you zoom in and we start looking at the specific symbols, the colour fade is less evident on small parts of it. You can start to see the brightness pop through a little bit, which is an indication of the what's happened there over time, different areas affected to different extents. You can see in this zoom in as well just the pitting, so just evidence of just an uneven, less controlled kiln than what you would find in the later examples. This helped me date this piece. But interestingly with this example is when we start to actually look at the back. So on the back what you see is bubbling, which we haven't seen so far. Now my understanding is this is caused by, again, the kiln, air being trapped and then popping up in the enamel during the firing process, or it could be contraction again. I'm not 100% sure. I've seen different theories when I've read into it, so if you happen to know this yourself, please just leave a comment, because I'll be really interested in hearing what you think on that. Okay, finally we'll look at this Chinese lidded urn that I sold some time ago. It was dated, sorry, to the late Qing, early Republic period, early 20th century. Nice yellow ground colour, which was more common during the time. What I want to do is just zoom in to the lid, because this was a good indication with the brass finial, nice patina there, and then on the piece itself you see that pitting again. So yeah, these are just a few good ways to determine age, although it's not to say a lot of this cannot actually be faked, which we'll look into now. Right then, well, Cloisonné has not been as extensively studied as other art forms such as porcelain, so there's less information about identifying fakes online. I have found this interesting example highlighted on a blog called dynasty.com, sorry if I haven't said that correctly. Now they've pointed out a potential imitation at two auctions. Now we're first looking at this
Cloisonné vase from the Qianlong period, which sold at Christie's in 2010 for around 145k, estimated between 30 to 50k. We can reasonably assume, I think, that this is accurately dated because Christie's would have made, as a major auction house, will have experts to determine this. Also, anyone spending that sort of money either is going to have great knowledge themselves or would have sought it from somebody who did have that knowledge. So, look, it has all the hallmarks from what I can see of a piece from that era. If we zoom in and we start looking at features we've been talking about already, you've got that rim again with the patina. Again, it's not completely uniform. Different areas have been more exposed to oxidization than others. You've got the pitting that you would expect to see from a piece of this area. I've also noticed this symbol by here. I think this is a good example of the skill of the person who made it. Looking at the angles, how it's done, it's done exceptionally well, but clearly, in my opinion, by hand. Now we'll look at the comparison piece. So similar shaped vase, sold in 2020, this time for $2,750. Down here they said it was from the Qianlong reign. And yes, the shape is certainly similar, but one thing that sticks out to me straight away is the shade of blue, which is different. Does this make it a fake? Not necessarily, but you start to wonder as we zoom in and start looking at these rims. Again, what I would say is whoever fakes it, and this is generally true of most fakers, or maybe not most, but a lot of them, they're going to have more knowledge than me. They're going to know all the things I'm talking about. So when they're trying to deceive, they're going to be making an effort around, things like the rims and the pitting. Now, looking at this, from my opinion, it just looks a bit strange. It looks like it's polished in parts and then highly patinaed in others, which just seems unlikely to me. Look, you can see the pitting again. That they know what they're doing. But I think this symbol here, in my opinion, just looks like it's done by machine. When we compare it to the other one I was talking about, exceptionally well done by hand. To me, that just looks like it's been done by machine. So there's just an example of the fakes which can be out there. I'm not saying, to be fair, I've got to say it's not guaranteed to be a fake, but it just doesn't seem to add up. And then you look at the difference in the prices they achieved, even when you take into account how much more Christie's would get, it still seems like a substantial difference. And also, fakers will imitate examples which are sold for high prices at major auction houses. So, unfortunately, the fakes are out there, they're not going anywhere. If anything, they're going to become more prevalent, and we've just got to keep an eye out there and just be very careful when we're buying. Right, so for this final section, I just wanted to have a look at general values. So what we're looking at is eBay's Terror Peak, which allows us to have a look at sold prices on eBay. Now, I'm not sure if this covers everything. I've just typed in Cloisonné and gone into the Chinese category. What we can see here is over the last 6 months, average sold price is £34 for a piece or a listing, and then the range 96 pence to £736. So we'll have a look at the higher value in a second. I just want to have a look at some of the pieces that are selling. So we got these two that sold recently. So today, here's Chinese Cloisonné enamel vases, sold for £13 plus postage. And yeah, these are pretty typical 20th century, probably mid 20th century onwards examples that you see quite often. They're nice enough. They're probably worth more than that if you hold on and to buy it now. Well, actually, that's what they did, but you probably could have achieved a bit more than that. But they're quite common. They're nice. You see a lot of them. We'll look at a couple more examples just to get an idea. So this one for £50, large Chinese vase, flowers and birds. I didn't mean to go off the page, so we'll just click on the photo. Yeah, again, 20th century example. It said it was large, so it goes to show what prices can be achieved just from a nice example, regardless of how old it is. Let's see if we can just have a look at something else. Well, this will be interesting. Pair of Japanese or Chinese Cloisonné vases. They went for £25. Postage £46. Yeah, I don't know why people do that, because it doesn't make any difference. I think people think that postage on eBay didn't have wasn't part of the charge, but it definitely is. So there we are. So in all, they achieved around £70. Well, that is interesting. I think these are probably Japanese, in my opinion. Um, what do you think? Leave a comment. Maybe I'm wrong, but they look more Japanese to me. More modern. There's a bit of a crack there, which does happen very easily on Cloisonné. So let's have a look at the highest price ones. Here's a basin. Wow, that's a stunner. Very unusual. Yeah, you can see why that achieved so much. One nice piece. What that go for? £736 plus £25 postage. Very nice. 18th century example. What do you think? I don't think so. I think it's a bit later than that. See these here? I think what we saw earlier on suggested maybe late 18th, but these were more prominent in the 19th century. This sort of straight line pattern, but you tell me what you think. Needless to say, it's still a very lovely place, to be fair, and actually £583.98. Okay, let's have a look at the Japanese examples then. So same search, I just categorised by Japanese cloisonné. Highest sold price on these on average £121, ranging from £2.13 up to £1,264. Now I always thought it was Japanese cloisonné being kind of an underrated market, in my opinion. I think it doesn't achieve the values it should based on how good it is, but maybe it's growing based on that. Here we go, the first one. So I didn't check the price, but yeah, very nice example. See these gold specks as well, seems or flakes. This kind of prominent thing that you see in the different styles of Japanese examples. That only achieves £17.80. I'll skip this one, so it'll probably come up later. This achieved £53. Yeah, these are really nice, I think. You know, you've got that beautiful background, smooth, nicely enamelled. Nice decoration. Don't know, maybe they should have achieved more. We'll look at one more. I wanted to find a more typical example. Yeah, this is a style you do see a lot of, and I think it went over quite a range. It was almost like this panel decoration. So yeah, I think these went over quite a long period of time. And just finally then we'll just look at the best sold prices. Amazing. These are really good examples, I would say, of that Japanese technique. So they got the insects. Do they know the artist here? Yeah, that stunning example there. Well, stunning pair. And again, wow. And just you could probably click through these all day and just see something totally different. That's the amazing variety that you find in the Japanese examples. So there we go. Just a few examples of the certain prices that Cloisonné has been achieving recently on eBay.
Okay, well, thank you for watching. That's the video today. Hopefully it gives you some valuable insight into the history, techniques, styles of cloisonné from China and Japan, especially if you're just getting started on that journey. I consider myself still learning as well, so if you have a comment which is an opinion, something you found useful, or even a correction, please leave it. I want to read it. I'm all about accuracy. That's more important than anything else, so I'd be very appreciative if you could leave that comment. I'm hoping to make more of these beginners guides in future, so it would be encouraging if you like that type of thing, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. I also, just to finish off, want to highlight my website, taliesinantiques.com. That's where I sell all my best items at the best prices. I also have blogs and histories of the items themselves. Also, if you could follow me on Instagram, it's Taliesin Antiques. So that's it today. Thank you for watching and goodbye. China. China. Thanks for clicking on to the Chinese and Japanese channel. Bloody hell. I have to say some basic words sometimes. Alright, thanks for watching. This is the YouTube. What the?